Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, story changers, and welcome back to another episode of the Black Lives Matter podcast series. Today's guest is Ruth-Ellen Danquah. Ruth-Ellen grew up in southeast London, and over the span of 20 years, she has worked in business development for the likes of Faurecia, Expedia, and Black & Decker. She learned early on how to connect with people without working hard for it, just simply by being her. Her curiosity about people on the other side of the phone resulted in £120 million in new business sales in under 2 years. But then, following a marriage breakdown where she found her and her 2 kids homeless, she learned one of the hardest lessons of all. Hurt people, hurt people. When she was homeless, the first, second, and third time, she realized a lot of her homelessness was about lemons. She was settling for lemons instead of demanding more from life. She was not meant for lemons and didn't accept them anymore. Ruth-Ellen truly believes we all make choices and there are consequences to these choices. However, when life hands you lemons, you can either create really bad lemonade or throw those lemons back at life with a heck no and say, "I ordered champagne, darling." After certifying in hypnotherapy, NLP, EFT, life coaching and Reiki, Ruth-Ellen stepped into her true purpose of taking some of her lessons and empowering others to heal too. Her philosophy is to be celebrated, not just tolerated. Today, through her coaching programs, speaking and online courses, she now helps others to let go of the shame and guilt of experiences that don't serve them, so that they can show up unapologetically visible in life and business and finally command the champagne they deserve, #no more lemons, so that they can be celebrated, not just tolerated. In this interview today, you will learn that clarifying questions help avoid a lot of conflict. The best question you can ask someone is, "What can I do to help?" That there's a balance between playing to your strengths and avoiding your weaknesses. And just because racism isn't explicit doesn't mean it's not a problem. You're going to learn this and so much more in this interview with Ruth-Ellen Danquah.
Possibly around, my earliest memory anyway, is probably around 11, when somebody said to me, "You should think before you speak." And that point of time, I then kind of muted myself because I constantly began to think before I spoke, and found myself in a space of not speaking much at all because I was overthinking. And years later, I would go into a sales role, and my job was to listen to people and to find out how I could offer them value, and then really truly honor what they're doing in their business so I can enhance what they're doing. And so I guess that skill of thinking before I spoke came out because that's all I did. I just listened. And that's probably one of the first times in my life that actually helped, because before it was kind of a hindrance. So I would listen to people, and I would speak to procurement departments and these managers, and I would find out fascinating things around their life story, and then be able to reflect, and then wouldn't even talk about the product, which was at the time software as a service type sort of platform for a company called Agencia, which was Expedia's business side. And we wouldn't even talk about the products. And I would end up being able to close £250,000 over the phone because I learned how to speak to people based on just listening to them. And sort of fast track forward, a few years later, I was in a toxic relationship and I had to leave that job, and doing lots of self-development work throughout that and being homeless and having 2 kids, one with autism, I came upon my own discovery of actually being dyslexic and dyspraxic. And I wanted to learn what that actually meant, because throughout my life, I didn't even know it. And so early 30s, it was strange for me to understand I've now got this thing, but I've always had it because I was born with it. And so I started this sort of social enterprise where people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, and autism would be able to have a platform and speak and share what their journey was and how they got to be successful. And I called it dyslexic success, only because dyslexia was the most known term at the time. People would come, they'll share their story, they'll share their brilliance really with the audience, and then they'll be able to sell from the stage. And I did that for like 6 years, and I loved it because I was able to just give people the permission almost to say, here you go, you're being heard in this space, where other spaces perhaps they're being ignored. You're here to just kind of shine. And that obviously helped me in my journey because I got to see brilliance, and then I kind of got to network a little bit. And so then I worked as an inclusion and inclusion trainer. So I'd go into corporates with other companies, and I would teach them how to help their employees be more inclusive for all of their other people that wasn't neurodiverse. So if there wasn't dyslexic and dyspraxic, normally they've got the highest unemployment rate. So my job was to help them understand the big skills that these people brought to their organizations. Like I would always open with, I sold 120 million pounds in new business sales. And they would start to listen because it was like, okay, there's value there. There's value. And then, so that throughout all that, I then learned about NLP, EFT, and all these great healing modalities that would help to add value to not only my training, but the coaching element, what I wanted to do. And so today, now I'm actually a visibility strategist. I help people to kind of be seen, and it makes sense if you think about it, because I was kind of hidden. There's lots of people that were hidden that I still work with that are neurodiverse, and now I want people to be kind of seen for their brilliance, whether they're neurodiverse or not, because too often we're told to think before we speak, and that stops us from sometimes being ourselves.
Yeah, very good. There was a couple of things that you just said so casually there, Ruth-Ellen, and the audience must be going, wait, what? So you're like, yeah, I could close $250,000 on the phone. I was homeless. Would you like to share with us a little bit more of this transition period where you're in this job and things were very comfortable, and then suddenly this relationship comes along, and then you end up finding yourself homeless? Can you expand upon that story of how that all came to be?
Yeah, definitely. So I think from an early age, I never really there was no modeling in front of me of what a healthy relationship looked like. So from no fault of my own parents or anything, it's not about a blame game. I didn't necessarily know what healthy relationships look like. So I kind of took the relationship I had with my mum as the kind of the benchmark of how relationships are. A person that kind of talks to you in a certain way, tells you what to do, tells you can't do something, and you believe them. And so when I got into the relationship realm, my first relationship when I was 19, I thought, okay, this is normal. If the person says the wall is white and it's clearly blue, I have to agree. If the person says I can't manage money because I'm rubbish at it, I have to agree. If the person says that I should shut up and not speak because I sound stupid, I agree. So I did that throughout my whole life. And then when I got it, from the age of 19 to around the age of 31. And then when I realized, I saw other people around me with these healthy relationships in the workplace. When I said, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm going to buy something for my wife, even though she's living at home and she doesn't really do much, I still want to treat her. And I'm like, wow. Well, in my relationship, I was constantly paying for stuff. I wasn't in control of my money, and I was treated a bit like crap. And so when I saw and heard of people's relationships were healthy, I was like, I want to understand what that is. Because one of the times one example is I would say to my first day of a new job, I'd say, I'm going, how do I look? It goes, you look like you're going to a disco, take it off. And I wouldn't argue. I would just take it off because I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to be in that space. I didn't like confrontation. And so when I saw the health relationship being modeled, I said, I need some space. And at the time, my kids, I think it was like primary school age. They're teenagers now, where they're like 19 and 20 now. But, healthy relationship, I said, I want some space. I'm not really sure about this anymore. He goes, okay, take your space and take your kids. And so we became homeless. And just for the viewers, like, context, those were his kids as well. But at that time when I wanted the space, it was like, well, you want to do something that I don't want you to do, go. So then I found myself having to obviously go to the homeless shelter, then maybe live with my sister for a little bit, and then eventually found ourselves in this 1-bedroom bedsit. All 3 of us in 1 bed, 1 big room, and it was horrible. But it was more pleasant being there than being in a relationship that I didn't like and wasn't healthy for me. And I wanted to break that pattern of what my kids saw as a healthy relationship as well. So, and then afterwards, we found our way into a new home, and there was another homeless situation, but that's probably going to take longer than expected. But the bottom line is, from those patterns that came up, I saw that I was around people that didn't appreciate my voice. And anytime I did speak out against their way of thinking, it wasn't a conversation. It was almost well, you can get out type thing, which made me realize the biggest way you can control your destiny is to essentially own your finances and own your voice, so that no one can tell you what to do and how to do it.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about conflict there, and this unhealthy relationship with conflict, or not having a good model of how to approach conflict. And I think this affects a lot of relationships where there's these 2 extremes of, in a relationship, you either escalate the conflict far more than necessary, or you avoid the conflict completely, and neither are good ways of approaching it. Is there anything that you've learned about conflict in some of your remodeling process that you think would be really useful to share for the audience?
Yeah, now this is not all perfect. I'm still navigating, but that was my disclaimer. If you didn't hear that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, but I think that the first thing that I always think is to stop and breathe, and to actually listen to what's being said, because oftentimes we've got some wounds that need healing. So normally when somebody says something, it's not necessarily that they're attacking you, but you might feel attacked. So to stop and breathe allows you to kind of reassess the situation and actually then ask clarifying questions. And once you can ask clarifying questions, it then makes it easier for you to detach from the emotions, because you're making it very easy for you to get on the same page. And I think I learned some of this from sales, actually, when you're clarifying what the prospect's saying, so that you're dealing with their objections, really. And I did do this in my marriage, now divorce, because at the time I did put 2 and 2 together. I was a bit like, well, I'm leaving them. And I actually wanted to leave, and that was probably the reason behind it. But if you can stop and pause, and if you can then ask a clarifying question, then you can get on the same page. Then you can have a real conversation, because then you can't overcome an objection if you don't know what the problem is. And so when you understand the problem, you've got more insight, you can ask more questions, and then you can overcome them by actually having, I think I learned a 4-step framework. It's called the PAST. It's more about being assertive, but it starts with, this is a problem. This is the how it affects me right now. This is a solution that's going to help me, but this is the payoff for both you and me, so that you know that I'm just not going to get everything out of it. It's 50-50. So the PAST framework works for me whenever I'm in that conflict type space and I want to be more assertive. I still want to get what I want out of it, but I also know that the person needs to get what they need out of it too.
Yeah. I really liked what you said there about clarifying questions. I think that avoids so much unnecessary conflict. I'll give you a very small example with me and my wife. During lockdown, obviously we were getting a lot of stuff delivered. And so I'd done a big Amazon book order, as I normally do, like every couple of months. I think I had like 16 books or something like that coming in. If I ever get into credit card debt, it will be because I buy too many books. So these books are coming in, and obviously they're all from different suppliers, so they don't come all at once. They kind of come in sort of 1s and 2s and 3s. So I got a package come in, and my wife gave me a package, and she was like, "Oh, that'll be another delivery for David." and there was just like something that I caught in the tone, and I was like, oh, that sounded like a bit passive aggressive. What's going on here? So anyway, I'm working away where I am sitting where we are speaking right now. I just thought, no, that's there's something here that's like stuck in my mind. So we're eating lunch, and I was like, look, I just wanted to run something by you. When you said another delivery for David, like, do you think I'm like ordering too much? Are you worried about how much like I'm spending or anything? And she was like, no, no, no. I was just making a joke about how you get so many books coming in at once. And I was like, oh, thank God, here I am been sitting here worrying that there's some underlying thing for the past couple hours. And it was literally nothing. It was just a joke. It was just a throwaway comment. And if I hadn't asked that clarifying question, that maybe starts sitting in the resentment bank, and then maybe something else goes in the resentment bank. And then by the time it comes up, it's a big conflict that's totally unnecessary. And all of that can be solved, as you said, with the clarifying question. I really like that.
Resentment bank, I like that, yeah, because aren't we? We're like, I'm going to put that away for another day. And
Yeah.
that hit hard, yeah.
I also like the connection of almost comparing an argument to sales, and how there's a lot of very similar process in there. And I thought I'd just take the opportunity to go back to your sales experience. Is there anything that you've taken from all those years ago in sales that you still find is really useful now in the present day?
Yeah, like I think sales is one of those jobs that everyone should do just as a baseline. Like I worked at McDonald's, Burger King. I was like, I couldn't get enough at the time. And when I worked in corporate, I was like, this is just amazing. And so I think in terms of what's really helpful in sales is the fact that setting up systems to help you do your business. Like when we go into a role in 9 to 5, all the systems are set up for us. When we do our own entrepreneurial type work, there is no system, and we have to kind of piece them together. And so I think systems are fundamental to help us do our job more effectively. Whether that's using a CRM tool, so customer relationship management tool, so that you can keep an eye on your leads, whether that is obviously using your email providers, so that you can keep an eye on nurturing people. But I think overall, with sales, there's so many things you can learn. I think patience is a really good one. So always like looking at this lead and how you can move them a bit forward in terms of their decision-making process. Looking at your qualifying leads and actually seeing if they are actually your type of client, if they've got the budget, and if they're actually going to move forward, or if they're actually going to be changing roles, so they're not even going to be the person accountable. So there's so many great things in sales that I've learned, but I think the number one thing is listening. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but we don't often listen enough. We find ourselves assuming many things, and I think it comes even back to clarifying questions. Sometimes people haven't bought a product off you or a service off you, not because your product or service isn't good, it's because they're just not there. They're not there in a buying decision, that they're maybe not there in their mindset. There's so many reasons as to why they're not buying something. So before you change that sales page, that offer, that product, have a conversation with people, listen to what they're truly saying, because maybe your offer doesn't need a tweak, but maybe you just need a brand new offer for that particular person, or something completely different. But the point is, when we assume things, we're too quick to change. Like people change their website all the time thinking it's still converting well. I mean, after how many people have actually landed on it? Is it 1,000, 2,000? What's your benchmark? So listen, don't make assumptions, and always kind of see how you can look at different ways of utilizing opportunities, because I think opportunities are huge. If people are complaining about certain things again and again and again, and you're seeing a pattern, that's an opportunity for you to say, actually, I've got something that can actually help with that.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to move ahead in your journey a little bit, Ruth-Ellen, to your discovery of dyslexia and dyspraxia and the work that you now find yourself doing in that realm. And you'll know this better than me, but is it something like 10% of the population have dyslexia?
Yeah, 10, 15, it changes, but yeah, around that. Some people are still not diagnosed, so
Yeah.
there's all,
So I think this is something that we're going to have to come a lot more aware of than we already are, because there will be someone in your family, friends, or work who is dyslexic with those kind of stats. Is there anything that you feel you should share right off the bat that maybe people don't know of about dyslexia, or they have misconceptions about dyslexia? Anything right off that you think this is like the thing that I need most people to kind of get into their heads?
yeah, it's just not, with dyslexia, it's not just about reading and writing. It goes beyond that, and because the spectrum is so wide and far few between, you've also got to look at the emotional repercussions of dyslexia. So oftentimes it's not about somebody's inability to read and write, because I went through school and I could read and write fine. It's the emotional repercussions of dyslexia, so the stresses in life, they're not necessarily known, the directions, and maybe interpreting things wrong. So if you've met one dyslexic person, you've met one dyslexic person. Have a conversation with that person, because that person's experience, dyslexic experience, is going to be so different to somebody else's. The key is to, again, listen, and you're probably going to hear this quite a few times today, but it is really important, because sometimes we hear with the intention to reply and say, oh, I know how to fix that. I mean, I've heard people say, I can cure dyslexia, which to me sounds really ignorant, but obviously that's their mindset and that's where they're at. And I think compassion is a big part of this when it comes to approaching anyone with dyslexia, so that you can truly listen to what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. This is going to be a selfish question for me, but I'm going to try and make it less selfish. So I have a lot of dyslexia in my family. So most of my mum's side of the family, there's dyslexia all over the place. My wife has dyslexia. So pretty much the odds are in that I'm going to be raising a dyslexic child based on genetics. So this is something that as I've gotten married and I start to grow a little bit older, I'm thinking, right, okay, how am I going to sort of prepare myself and approach that when the likely time comes? And I'll extend this beyond just my selfish question to everyone, in terms of if you know you have someone in your friend's family, workplace who has dyslexia, what are some of the ways that you can support them, nurture them, and help them to make the most of the skills that they've got?
It's a huge question. Let's see. Well, first of all, 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic. So when it comes to limitations, let's clear all that away. Mm-hmm. They're, limitless people. They can do anything they put their mind to. Now, in terms of support, I think it's generally around asking them what will be helpful for them, because sometimes people will be like, oh, okay, I just need you to help me with, I don't know, scribing or something, or another person might say, I just need you to actually organize my calculations for the month so that I can budget. Everyone's going to be so different. So it's just being very open and saying, how can I help? I don't know if anyone's ever watched Amsterdam. It's just an Amazon Prime series where this guy always says, how can I help? And it's so relieving. It just helps people to be like, well, actually, this would be really helpful if you could. So support-wise, again, it's just being open and being available for them. Second of all, I think there's some stresses around, there's people with dyslexia get stressed out. I'm not saying easily or more than others, but they do get stressed out. And you might think sometimes that, it's an easy or simple thing that they're getting stressed out about, but it can be really frustrating. So if somebody says, if you can read the signal, body language a little bit, that might be helpful just in terms of being able to communicate more effectively, because there is this processing delay sometimes. Again, it depends on some of these results of their spiky profile, as in what they're really good at and what they have challenges with. I don't like to use issues, I like challenges. So with a spiky profile, people are really, really exceptional at certain things, and then they have challenges with other things. Now, there is this mindset that you can just help them be even better at what they do. So just support them at excel in their superpowers and then delegating things that they're not good at. I like that process, but there is that bit of, well, we can sometimes be in that space of avoiding things. So there has to be a nice, healthy balance. And if you can help them with that nice, healthy balance and let them encourage them. If you've ever heard of love languages, I'm going off a tangent here.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've heard of love languages, you know that certain people receive love and praise different ways. And so if you know, if the person knows themselves as best as anyone could, and just takes a basic love language test, they'll know what they like to, how they like to receive love. And so if you can reinforce that when you're speaking to them, that's going to be helpful. Because if you decide to give them physical touch, like hugs, and they're just not into that, it's almost like you're giving them something they don't want to have, and you'll feel offended. So it's always important to kind of match that too. So that's in terms of support. And just be honest with them, but also have a little bit of empathy. I know that sometimes when you talked about the tone before, I know that when you are dyslexic and neurodiverse, you might not necessarily understand your own tone and how you're coming across to others. And so, there might be a little bit of emotional intelligence needed on both sides, development-wise, just so that you're not thinking that I'm doing all this work and this person's not even meeting me halfway. It's an ongoing thing. Dyslexia doesn't go away. You just manage it in a more effective way by looking at, I don't like coping strategies, success strategies that are going to help people to just be more effective in their everyday life. There's going to be days when they're going to be so energy's going to be on point, they're going to be on it, and other days they're going to struggle to spell certain words or to do simple things because the stresses in life beat them down. So managing your energy as a dyslexic person is really important, so you're not going through this sort of trough of emotions as well. So those are a few things that a person could do.
As a little aside on love languages, I really recommend this as well. I'm going to rope my poor wife in again. I feel she's been roped in so much of this conversation of, I did kind of like the love languages test with her, maybe about 2 years into our relationship. And I realized that I'd gotten it totally wrong in terms of I'd communicated my love language to her. So my love language is quality time. That's like my number one language. So I was always trying to express my love through quality time. And my second one was acts of service. So quality time, acts of service. So kind of spending time with her and then like doing things for her. And it's not that she doesn't appreciate that, but her love languages are words of affirmation and gift giving. So all she really needs, or what she wants the most, is just to be told that she's beautiful, to be told that she's done a good job, to be told that I love her. And I'm planning all these fancy sort of experiences and sort of acts of service. And I just need to tell her more often that she looks nice, or I'm really proud of her. So it just goes to show how you can cross wires on something that you think you know so well and with someone who you think you know so well. So actually, for everyone who's listening, if you haven't done the love languages test already, I can't recommend it more. It makes things so much simpler for any relationship, not just a romantic relationship, but any relationship you have.
Completely. Yeah. And I love that, the fact that you took the time to do that, and you realize, well, this isn't as effective, and it's always good to share each other's love languages, because I know that Myers-Briggs tests are great and that helps you to do all this great stuff, but the love language thing just kind of, it's so simple and it's so effective as well. So it just shows you don't have to overcomplicate things at all.
You've talked about how you now help people to become more visible, and this notion of visibility I found really interesting, because maybe about 4 years ago I'd never heard the term visibility in more than perhaps invisibility. But maybe in about the last 4 years, there's yourself and maybe several other people who I've heard talking about this notion of visibility. It seems to be something that's sort of creeping into like our sort of common day language a little bit more. Would you like to explain more about what visibility is, and then how you're helping people to become more visible?
Yep, sure. So visibility is in terms of, the everyday business, or even when you're in work as well, it's just being seen and heard. People knowing what you do in a way that's going to help you to generate money and to generate the opportunities that are going to give you more money. So it all leads to money. The end point, if you're looking at a tangible outcome, yes, marketing is great and it helps people to understand what you do and connect with you, but essentially you want them to pay you so that you can give them a transformation. And so visibility is all about, okay, how can I best leverage where I'm at the moment in terms of the platform, maybe on YouTube or Pinterest or wherever else, and make sure that I'm there, standing in my power. Not like I'm there and I'm sharing this, whatever else. It's kind of like, this is me authentically, completely showing you who I am, flaws and all, doing the shadow work, and I'm here for all of it, type thing.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the blocks, do you think, where people aren't as visible as they want to be?
People, there's so many, but I'm laughing. But I'm it's empathy, so empathy laugh, really. So I think one of the key ones is the voice thing. People think that whatever they're going to say and whatever they're going to share, people said it before, and whatever they're sharing, nobody wants to hear because they've heard it all before, and so they've got this block around sharing their truth or their version of the truth because they're like, nobody cares. And perhaps I call it a visibility wound. I do lots of visibility wound healing because there is a mindset behind their belief system that it didn't just come from nowhere. Things like not liking what they look like on camera, actually detesting what they look like on camera. Like, there's no self-love there. They actually tell themselves they're not decent. One's about, if you're neurodiverse, perhaps it might be the pace that you're speaking, because people are like, oh, you have to slow down. I know lots of people that speak really fast and they're still successful, but they have this mindset, well, I have to speak a certain way. I can't speak without a stutter. And there's all these other things and all these connotations. It could also be that, the color, like, they're not, representation wise, they're not used to people that look like them on the screen as often. And so they're like, well, is anyone going to want to hear from me because I don't look like everybody else? There's blocks around actually speaking their truth. So rawness, like, this is what I think, this is what the industry says, but this is my feelings. And so they want to kind of step out of that cookie cutter stuff, and they want to say what really on their minds. They want to speak to that one ideal client, but what they're finding themselves doing is following that template from content creation calendars, which says, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? And so it becomes very generic. So those are some of the blockers anyway.
Mm-hmm. You've been speaking about being seen and heard, and you've just talked about representation there as well. And I think that's a good transition into moving into the sort of the secondary subject of our interview today, in that I want to take some time to talk about Black Lives Matter with yourself, being a Black person, and really hearing from your perspective about all of the attention and issues that have come up. I say in recent times is only there's been attention on it in recent times. Obviously, the causes and issues are historic. And to begin with, do you have any experiences of racism? It could be yourself, or it could be someone else's, that you feel you would like to share with the audience today.
Yeah, so there's been a few incidents, and at the time I was like, I'll brush it off because that's what I used to do anyway. I used to brush it off and kind of process and then go back to the powers that be to sort it out. But I remember working for a corporate as a trainer, and one of their French delegates said something like, oh, you don't have to paint your hands because they're already black. And then he was eating some chocolate or whatever because it was a lunch break, and he said, oh, look, I'm eating chocolate. It's black, just like you. And so those sort of microaggressions are just blatant racisms, things, and not necessarily, and also, like, previously I was in jobs and they said you don't really fit into the culture. And now that could be a cultural fit, but I always think, well, we're now in a times of culture add, where it's about what somebody can add, not that they look like everybody else. But so those are a few of the things that have come up for me. It's kind of like being passed over for positions, and to be honest, in the corporate world, maybe about 7-8 years ago, it wasn't actually as bad, but it seems to have turned and got even worse. And it might just be because of the lay of the land and politics and everything else. But yeah, those are a few of the things that came up for me in my short time. And I think now in the space that I'm in, when it comes to kind of being in Facebook groups, it's kind of like you just get ignored if you don't look like the majority of people that are in the group. So yeah.
That's interesting. So even on something like Facebook, do you feel somebody can put a post and you can put an equivalent post and your post literally gets less attention and engagement than if a white person says exactly the same thing?
Yeah, and just to give some context, just in case people are thinking, oh, you're just being sensitive, because that's a term that comes up a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you mention this stuff, you're being sensitive. Somebody mentioned that in a particular group. They said, look, I've noticed this when a white person puts something up and a black person doesn't get as much attention, and the group owner was like, oh yeah, really sorry about that, we're going to do better. So they did notice it, but they just didn't say anything about it, because they almost like, oh well, what can we do? You know, now they're like, oh, we're going to do better. And there was a post and it was like, oh, black women in the group, please put your products and services up. You know, we want to support you, because this is the whole Black Lives Matter, right? So they put, all these black women put their posts up, and I think there was a lady that went back to all the women that put the post up and says, did anyone actually buy your stuff? And every single woman said no one bought anything.
Wow.
So I think there's this, you know, people have this facade thing going on. They want to look like they're doing good things, but they're not necessarily sticking to what the perception of what they want to be seen as. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to that a little bit later with another question. I think we can cover that more. There's something I just wanted to return to in terms of some of the experiences that you've had, and it reminds me of an article that I've read during this time. I've been doing a hell of a lot of reading in the past few months about this, and it was talking about Meghan Markle, actually, and it was comparing US racism with UK racism. And they said in the US you get quite explicit racism. You know, somebody will say something to your face and it'll be very obviously racist. But in the UK there's this kind of like subtle racism, and it's something that you can't really put a pin in, but it's prevalent. It's through the media, it's through our corporate cultures, it's through even some of our educational messaging. Would you say that's a good assessment, that a lot of UK racism, obviously there's some horrible explicit stuff as well, but a lot of it is this undercurrent racism?
Yeah, it's this, the undercurrent feel of like, was that, could I can't, because most of the time it becomes a feeling as well, and you're like, I've got a feeling as well, and you can't quantify a feeling, because nobody. So when you go to somebody in HR, they say, well, what did they actually say? Well, they didn't say it, but it's the way they said it, and so then it becomes like, oh, okay dear. It becomes very easy to dismiss. So I definitely think it is, and I think the way they treated Meghan Markle in the press in the UK definitely wasn't the way it compared to Kate Middleton. Yeah. Completely, you know. So
it's some of like the side-by-side headlines of like a baby story, but how they talk about a baby story of Kate compared to a baby story of Meghan. It's just, yeah, when you put side by side like that, you start to see the subtlety of it. Yeah, definitely.
Even the way they're treating the different children, like, you know, like one's higher than the other. Like, oh, there's a really gorgeous picture of Prince or whatever, and then you're like, the other one's like, oh, they don't even call him Prince. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, I thought that was just an important thing to highlight. 'Cause a lot of the audience are UK based. About 35% of the podcast audience are UK based, and I think some of us have been sitting here in the UK going, oh, this is a US problem. This is a police problem in the US. This is a slavery problem in the US. It's because of the culture and the history of the country and the politics of the country even. So it's a problem over there, but it's not a problem over here. And I think it's just worth highlighting that it's something you need to be aware of, because it's a lot less obvious in the UK than perhaps some of the things that we're seeing in the US. And I think that's maybe why there's been less support overall in the UK, because a lot of people don't think it's a problem, because they don't, we don't have the KKK walking around Trafalgar Square, for example. There isn't this obvious sign of racism, but actually it is here. It's just expressed in a different form.
Completely. So this unconscious bias that people have around certain subjects, like when you say, I think that was a bit racist, or they'll be like, you're being sensitive, or, why don't you go back home, back to your own country, and you're like, well, I was actually born here. It's all of those types of things that are, or when the people ask you, where are you from? Like, why do you, it's almost like they're waiting for you to say, oh, this is, I speak Yoruba and this is where I'm from. It's like they don't connect the two. And I think it's really important to identify where there might be some unconscious bias that you might have in your everyday. Like when you say stuff like, I've got black friends, I can't be racist. It's like, really? That doesn't discount you from being racist. It just means you have black friends. So yeah, there's so many examples that are under the radar.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the Black Lives Matter conversation is missing at the moment?
I think there's so many conversations going on that you don't necessarily know what's being resolved and what's not being resolved. I think, though, from a cultural point of view for companies, I said this a couple of weeks back, that there needs to be some cultural intelligence training going on. It can't just be inclusive and belonging and diversity training. Diversity is what you already have. So everyone's diverse, right? Inclusion is like, okay, now we're going to build some frameworks in there to like everybody to be included. And then belonging is like, I actually feel like I belong in this company. But that can't really happen if there's no cultural intelligence going on. If people still have the stereotypes, people still think somebody got the job because they're black, if somebody still has these ideas about somebody's culture, and they look at somebody, they hear somebody's tone and they're like, oh, that person's very aggressive, that's an aggressive black woman, all those things need to be readjusted. And that comes down to real in-depth cultural intelligence training. And I don't think that's happening in terms of, okay, there's inclusion and diversity officers popping up everywhere. It seems to be the new thing. But what about training people on how to be more culturally aware? Because my black experience is going to be completely different to another black person's who's from the Jamaican background. I'm half Ghanaian, half Nigerian. And so, well, my parents are, I am because my parents are. But my experience is completely different to somebody else who might be just fully Nigerian. And so what I might be offended at, somebody else might not be. And so there needs to be this open conversation in corporates and in just general, like the entrepreneurial world. How do we have more awareness of other people's cultures without it feeling like you need to educate me? Because I shouldn't be educating anyone. I'm not a specialist in cultural intelligence or inclusion or anything else. I might have trained in neurodiversity, but in terms of sitting down and speaking to somebody about this is what you need to do, isn't my job. There's professionals that are professionals in cultural intelligence. And I think if they just have that as a standard, as in even HR people have to have that training, then I think that will actually help for long-term solutions. I think right now we're having these short-term solutions, these short-term conversations. Oh, right, we're going to put some funding towards some black projects. We're going to have some more pictures around that have minorities in them. Even using BAME, as a term, is that helpful? Because you're saying that they're a minority. Don't they stay a minority if you keep on calling them minority?
Yeah.
So it has to go beyond this maybe plaster effect of healing the wound. It has to go through some proper surgery, some proper long-term work, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that point, it reminds me of something our previous guest in the series said, and she was talking about there's different shades of black, and she was actually talking about a little bit of prejudice and discrimination that happens in the black community in terms of the lighter your skin, the better you are. And I think your point kind of links that in terms of when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, it's almost like we are just pigeonholing black people as black people are all the same. And I think I probably do this as well, that I just think of every black person is African and all Africans are pretty much the same, whereas Africa is one of the most diverse places in the world culturally. Just the same as if you looked at white people, you've got white Europeans, you've got white Americans, you've got white Australians, New Zealanders, and they all have different aspects to them. And that's something that I'd say I probably haven't considered, and I know a lot of other people haven't considered, is that we need to think of and be more aware of the nuances within the black community, rather than just saying, oh, here's black people and here's the black community, and they're all exactly the same.
Yeah, completely. And I think the colorism issue has been going on for so long as well. And I remember watching Black Panther. Trust me, there's a point to this. I remember watching, and somebody said, how comes in Black Panther there's only dark-skinned people? What about us? And the person that was actually asking that question was of mixed race heritage. And the person that said to her, oh, it's not for us, sis, even though she was mixed race as well. And it's almost like there was a separation going on, and it was like you missed the whole point of Black Panther. It was about separating all types of black people. And for you to then want to say, what about us? It almost feels like you've been in the spotlight for so long to an extent that you're saying, I'm missing out. It was a very weird conversation. And it wasn't just like a conversation between me and you. It was like a conversation on social media. Like, I'm brave enough to say it this way because this is my mindset. This is where I'm at in terms of my emotional intelligence, in terms of my cultural intelligence. So I think it's really important that we do have these open conversations, because there is some course correcting needing to go on, and it is within our communities and also externally as well.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of something I wanted to come back to earlier, talking about social media, and sort of there was these admins of the Facebook group, and they said, we want to do better. And you were kind of sitting there saying, well, okay, but what are you doing to make things better? Like, how is this changing? And as someone who has a Facebook group, and you're in my Facebook group, and this is something that I've tried to sort of do, is think about, well, as you said, there's a difference between diversity and inclusion. You might have a very diverse Facebook group, but it might not be very inclusive. How do you think that we can do some, like, what are the real steps to promoting inclusion? And it doesn't sound like it's just, oh, everyone who's black and has a business, you get to post in the group today. That doesn't sound like the solution. What do you think might be the solution?
I think it's getting expertise to talk about what they do, and not just assuming those expertise are of Caucasian background. I think sometimes you're gonna relate to people that look like you. So you're going to pick people that look like you, and people that, you know, they might appear to be easy and accessible because it's going to be easy to have a conversation with them because you're used to the way that they talk and the way they look. And, you know, I've heard this before, like some people have said, I feel more comfortable working with people that look like me, right? So we just have to get out of our comfort zone a little bit, and we have to start approaching people that we won't necessarily always approach, and get them to give them a platform to say, here's the link. This is for everyone. It's available to everyone. And when you're actually picking them, it's not based on the bias of, oh, well, I can get along with this person. It's giving them the equity, the equality and equity that is needed for them to raise their business. I think that's one of the ways. I think it's just having real conversations. I think sometimes when there are conversations which are quite superficial to an extent, like how is everyone doing today, it becomes less engaging. So I think the more you can actually, as the leader of the group, or any group, anyone that's listening to this, starts talking about something that's real and on their heart, the more you're going to get people to talk about it as well. I think when you go deep, everyone else goes deep with you. If you go shallow, it's almost like there's a leadership thing. So it's like being the change that you want to see, right? So it's having those conversations with different people. It's tackling those difficult subjects and getting uncomfortable. There is just not one way to solve this, and I think we're gonna learn as we go along, because we haven't actually solved this. it's still an unsolvable, almost crime, where we don't know how to fix it doing this one thing. But there's loads of books available, like perhaps if you are reading a book and it is about white fragility, or however you say, or why I'm not talking to white people about race anymore, you know, you're bringing that conversation to everybody. And those books are diverse. Because when you look at the authors of books, the ones that get the bestsellers, they're generally of the background that are white, because perhaps they get more opportunities to be published and to get bestsellers available and to have a strategy that works for them in terms of visibility. So it's also about bringing to light some books that might not necessarily be by just the Caucasian authors. It's mixing it up. And when I talk about, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I think sometimes people want to put the BAME thing into it, and they want to say, well, we also need to help other minorities as well. I think that stops you from being able to see what impact you're making. And you want to know what impact you're making in certain communities. So I think everybody has the space, giving people the space to do it. If you have to do a special, because maybe that will help. I know in Insight Timer, they had a Black Lives Matter special or a Black Creator special. It might be offensive for some, but I think if you just don't address it at all, you're then having this equity issue again. So.
Mm-hmm. This links to another question I wanted to ask in terms of white supporters of Black Lives Matter. And I think a lot of white people who support the cause haven't really known the best way to do it. Do I post a black square on Instagram? Do I share this article? Do I buy this book? Do you have any advice for someone who's a white supporter and how they can best support Black Lives Matter?
I think the thing is there are a few. I saw this TikTok again. There is relevancy. So please listen. TikTok where somebody pretended to be a Black Lives Matter organization, and they said that this is the Black Lives Matter organization. This is how you set it up, and then you can get volunteer money. And it was completely fake. It was done by this white teenager, and he was just teaching people how to do it to get fake money, to get money from people by being a fake organization. So I think putting money into an organization that you don't necessarily know who it's going to isn't always going to be the best solution. I think if you want to be an ally, maybe if you see, it could be just in your everyday. It's not necessarily, you don't need these big, massive things. It could be like you see somebody with an offer out there, and the offer looks great, but maybe you're a copywriter and you know that you could probably help them to tweak it. Maybe just offering your services and say, look, I noticed that I want to be an ally. I want to help you. Do you want to come on a call with me and I can help you with your copy? It could be something as simple as that. It could be as simple as setting up a foundation and saying this money goes towards scholarship programs, so that there is an easy entry point to some of my programs. It could be, there's so many ways you could. In terms of allyship, though, I think one of the best ways is just to have a conversation with people. How can I help you? Going back to the Amsterdam thing, how can I help? What will be helpful to you? I don't want to assume anything. I want to make sure that you're comfortable in this conversation, but I'm comfortable too. And then if they say something and it's quite unreasonable, like buy my stuff, like, well, I don't actually find your stuff relevant, but I'm happy to promote you on my podcast. I'm happy to promote you to my list. So you're not then having to do something that's out of alignment, because at the same time you want to feel good as well as an ally. You don't want to just be that person that does something because you feel guilty, because nobody wants guilt. We want you to just be able to give from that space of, I want to help. I just don't know how. And each person's going to be different towards in terms of help. I won't necessarily take people's money, but if you find my program beneficial, then I'd say take a look at it. But to not look at it because of my color, that's being the opposite of an ally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the big question. We're talking a lot, we're raising awareness a lot, we're reading a lot, but ultimately, I don't believe, I'm sure you do as well, that all this awareness needs to create some kind of end result. We need some solutions. We can't just keep on talking about the problems. So the big question is, what do you think are some of the solutions that we can work towards and create with this increased awareness and attention?
That's a big question. I don't have the big answer, but I think it comes down to a few steps. So looking at people's talent pipeline, even as an entrepreneur, you probably look at your talent pipeline and you're probably thinking, oh, I'm just going to give this to a mate because this is the best way to do it. But could you look at the way that you're recruiting in a way that's going to be much more fairer? Could you look at the way that you're promoting people in a way that's much more fairer? Can you look at the way that you are, I think it's through every aspect of society. It basically, we've got this awareness now. So now it can't just be awareness, oh yeah, I know Black Lives Matter. It's like, okay, so how do I make a Black life actually matter? And so I think one of the key things from an individual point of view is to lower the entry points of certain things. So there's a class issue when it comes to race, and it's much more around entry points. Certain things are just going to be out of people's price points. I think certain things are going to be just out of people's mindset because they're saying, well, I can't even afford that. So I think there is an element of finance and looking at how you can perhaps have foundations or one of the things I saw which was done really well actually was what's that thing when you raise all the money together? I cannot remember.
Crowdfunding.
Yeah, crowdfunding platforms. Raising awareness of those things that might perhaps help Black supporters or supporters of colour. And just being more inclusive in your language as well, perhaps. Some of the way that you are, when you're marketing, okay, this is probably a good one. When you're coaching and you're thinking of these are the issues and blocks for your clients, also look at it from a cultural point of view, because they're going to have different mindsets around their own beliefs, and the beliefs are going to be much more about race and culture. So tackle those things in a sensitive manner as well. Ask some questions around what they believe about their identity, because from a racial point of view, they could have everything the white counterpart has as well, but their belief system might say, no one's going to buy from me because I'm Black. And so that the mindset work that you're doing constantly with your clients might not even be inclusive in that way as well. So I think there's so many things to consider, but I think you've got to find things that are relevant to your business. If you are a business owner and you are recruiting new people, new staff, how you can make them more fair and have more equity in that, and not going off people's racial bias, not going off your racial bias. If you hear a tone and you think she's angry, don't think that, because that's probably, again, a unconscious racial bias. And then make it everything applicable to your business. Don't just think, oh, I'm going to do this outside. How can I make my business more inclusive? How can I make it more culturally aware? How can I make it more people feel like they belong? My opinion.
Yeah, I thought it was really important what you were bringing up about bias there and unconscious bias. One of the other Black ladies in my Facebook group was talking about the implicit racism bias that Harvard University has produced, and I took it, and I have a moderate bias towards European faces rather than African faces. So here I am doing this Black Lives Matter podcast and thinking I'm all sort of woke and progressive, but I've got some unconscious stuff that through my cultural upbringing, I pretty much had a white upbringing, just all of these things layer on and you're not even aware of how they influence and affect you. So I would highly recommend that everyone takes these types of sort of implicit and unconscious bias tests, because as we were saying earlier, a lot of this stuff isn't explicit and obvious. It's all the underlying stuff that you can't really put a pin in it, and that also includes coming from yourself as well, not just saying, oh well, the people around me are implicitly biased. No, I'm implicitly biased as well.
Yeah, no, it's important. Yeah, those tests, and I think to give yourself compassion, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think, beating yourself up about it isn't helpful, because again, it goes back to guilt, and nobody wants guilt. It's like, what can you do in terms of your daily actions and put them into habits so that you can change the way you're perceiving the world.
Well, Ruth-Ellen, I'd like to bring our wide range of conversations today towards an end. And with this in mind, I've been asking the questions so far in our conversation today, but I actually want to give the very last question to you. Do you have a question that you would like to ask our audience today, or you think the audience should be asking themselves?
Okay. Interesting. So I guess there's so many questions, but just one. I think the question you could ask yourself is, are you making space for people that are from a different background to you? And if not, one thing are you going to do today to make that space?
I like it. So Ruth-Ellen, for our audience today who've been listening to you and they've resonated with your story, they're interested in your work, they want to find out a little bit more about who you are and what you do, where would you be directing them to go?
If you go to my website, ruth-ellen.com, there's lots of information there about what I do, my social media. Links will be there as well, latest blogs, all there for you to be able to assess whether there's going to be some good information there for you, or just pass it on to somebody that you think could find it helpful.
Brilliant. Well, I like to always summarize a conversation with a guest with a single word or a theme. And I think the theme of our conversation today has really been diversity. And I think that's what I've really taken from yourself, is you've got this very diverse set of experiences and knowledge. You worked in sales and you work in dyslexia, and we've been talking about race issues as well. And you've been able to bring so much insight and thought into all of those different topics. And so I think diversity has been the theme of this conversation, but actually I think you're a very diverse person in terms of what you've been able to bring into this conversation. So I just want to mark that and acknowledge that here today.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.